There's something happening all across our country. People of all ages and colors and creeds who are, yes, taken to the streets, and also rallying our friends, organizing our neighbors, and getting out the vote. And I'm so inspired by a new generation pushing us to live the values we share: decency and fairness, justice and love. So let's fight with conviction. Let's fight with hope. Let's fight with confidence in ourselves and a commitment to each other, to the America we know is possible, the America we love.
Great to be with you all again today. Politics and Flows, Big Ideas Series, episode 11. Gosh, we're almost a teenager, who knew? And on the heels of the inspirational conversation we had yesterday with Jamal Bowman and the debate performance last night from Senator Kamala Harris last evening, her poise, her command of the facts, and her willingness to look Vice President Pence in the face as he prattled on about some variation of lies and false indignation, they deserve a round of applause. Whatever. It deserves a standing ovation. To be able to keep composure when someone's like, it's a lie. He didn't not disapprove whatever. So Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, if you ever see this, we salute you. Thank you for your performance last evening with dignity, poise, and grace in the face of such truculence. And here's what I would like to offer for people still angered by the blatant lies, entitlement, and indignation offered in the form of Vice President Mike Pence. Can we begin to shift our focus to the task at hand? Meaning, rather than being angry at them for being who they are, can we step closer into standing into our truth, right? So rather than being mad at their lies, can we call people and convince them to vote? Can we have a overwhelming repudiation of their lies at the poll that it just breaks everything that they stand for? So we know who they are, let's just make it plain. Rather than being angered by their lies, can we be inspired by our truth? Can we look their corruption and mendacity in the face? And can we be inspired to vote, tell others to vote, and do all we can to create the future that we're hoping for, working for, and yearning for? To be honest, I'm losing patience in the bad habits of good people. And it's time for all of us to flip the script. We quite literally have to stop focusing on the tortured past that we've lived through and begin creating the future that we hope for. This is the season that we've been hoping for, leading up to the moment we've been waiting for. It's 27 days until Election Day. It's election season, and this is our chance to reimagine our government as one that serves the needs of others and not self-interest as demonstrated by Trump and Pence and their acolytes. Shout out to Mike Levin. Move On is organizing petitions and encouraging calls to Senate Democrats to stop the charade that's happening in the Senate for Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation. And, we're also doing vote mobilization tactics and Mobilize to Win and vote tripling to make sure that the millions of members that we have and the millions of people that our members touch go out to vote, because we have to vote. Like Stacey Abrams says, she's not optimistic or pessimistic, she's determined. So we must be equally determined to vote in such numbers that just is an overwhelming repudiation of everything they've stood for, which by my reckoning is nothing. So again, whether you vote by mail, whether you drop off your ballot, whether you vote early in person, or whether you vote on Election Day on November 3rd, vote. Show up, tell other people, have a plan, and vote with precision. Don't be cavalier about this. There are some parts of the country that are looking for excuses to disenfranchise voters. So vote with precision, vote early, and check on your vote to make sure it's taken care of. You can also text "We Got Us" to 668-366 to get involved in our voter mobilization efforts, our vote tripling efforts. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce today's guest. Before being elected to Congress in November 2018, Mike Levin was involved in a variety of local, state, and federal political campaigns and community organizations for over 2 decades. He was raised in South Orange County. He attended public elementary and junior high school there. He spent his high school years in the LA County area at Loyola High, and then went to Stanford, where he was honored. I didn't know you were student body president. Okay, so he was student body president at Stanford.
So somebody had to do it, Reggie.
After college, Mike was in the Choral Fellows program, and he went to Duke University School of Law. After law school, he served as executive director of the Democratic Party of Orange County, California, and worked as an attorney focused on environmental and energy regulatory compliance and government affairs. And I just also want to say, like, Mike is a friend of mine. He's a passionate believer in clean energy and has over a decade of experience in helping accelerate the transitions towards more sustainable energy. And we'll talk about that later in the program. Mike has served for several years on the board of the Center for Sustainable Energy based in San Diego, and he co-founded Sustain OC in Orange County. And for his work in clean energy, Mike was named in the OC Metro 40 Under 40. Mike lives in San Juan Capistrano and is with his wife, Chrissy. Hello, Chrissy, miss you. Chrissy's a graduate of University of Arizona and the Wharton School, and their 2 children, ages 8 and 6. So make sure you say hello to your kids for me. And I'll also add—
They may come in here and say hi to you.
Just like we did last time, right?
Yep.
So Mike is a friend of mine, and I respect him very much. I've met his family, and I do my best to check in on him and his staff with regularity. He's a good man, and I'm delighted to connect with him again today. Without further ado, welcome Congressman representing California's 49th Congressional District, Representative Mike Levin.
Thank you, Reggie. It's fantastic to see you, my friend. I wish we were in the same place doing this face-to-face. That'll have to happen soon, but I hope that you and your loved ones are all doing well, all staying safe during this craziness. And we're doing the best we can. Obviously, 27 days to go. We're excited. We need to stay healthy, stay safe out there. I've got my mask. I brought the good one for you today. Got that one for you today. But these are crazy times, my friend. And I'm just grateful for your activism, for you and Move On and everybody out there who's going to work hard over these next 27 days to make sure that our country goes back towards hopefulness, back on a path where we respect and appreciate each other and treat each other with kindness and decency again.
Absolutely. And so let me ask first things first. How's the wife and kids? Everyone doing okay?
Yeah, Chrissy's working harder than ever. I mean, she works outside the home and stays very busy. I don't know when I'm not around, because I go back and forth quite a bit, as you know. I don't know how she pulls it all off. Keeping our house running, with any semblance of normalcy, but she manages to do a spectacular job. And we have an 8-year-old son, a 6-year-old daughter. Both of them are in our local public school, and they are now literally, as we are speaking, they are on their Chromebooks, trying to learn, trying to make the most of this very difficult situation. And my hat's off to their teachers. To the schools that are working really, really hard to try to figure all this out. And I think our local schools have tried to put in place a curriculum that it won't replace in-person education, given the circumstances that we're in. Hopefully will provide, a decent educational experience for the students while keeping them safe and keeping the teachers safe as well. But we're doing fine. I think we're very blessed. We're very fortunate in that, when I see the way that this pandemic has impacted the American people, it is a K-shaped recovery. Last night at the debate, Mike Pence said it was a V-shape. It's really a K, meaning if you made over $60,000 a year, or you make over $60,000 a year, you're able to work from home, you're probably doing all right. You can't do all the things that you would want to do. You can't go to the places where you would want to go, but you're not worried about where your next meal is going to come from. No question that if you're in the stock market, for those that are fortunate to be in the stock market, right. During this pandemic, we've seen that there's really no correlation between the success or failure of the stock market and the economy as a whole. We know that 87% of the value of the stock market is owned by the top 10% wealthiest Americans. So then there's the other half of the K. And the other half of the K is everybody who's getting left out, left behind. And right now, 1 in 4 children in the United States are food insecure. We've got 26 million Americans that are on unemployment insurance. There are 22 million jobs that have been lost as a result of COVID-19. Only about half of them have come back. And the reality is that they desperately, people that fall in the group of desperately needing food, needing money to pay their rent for basic necessities, they are being left behind right now by this administration. Because just the other day, as I'm sure everybody watching and listening to this saw, the president decided to unilaterally pull out of any negotiations with the House. And it's so unbelievably frustrating, Reggie, because we have been working very diligently to come to an agreement. Yeah. And I thought if we would have talked a few days ago, in fact, if we would have talked 5 minutes before the president's tweet, I would have given it a bigger than 50-50 chance that we would have gotten a bipartisan deal, because we passed a bill last week when I was in DC. It was $2.2 trillion.
I remember that. Steve
Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, was negotiating for the president. They were at around 1.6. So you figure we're at 2.2, and we'd come down from 3.4. Yep. We'd already come down $1.2 trillion. And the administration had gone up from about $1 trillion to about $1.6 trillion. So that's only 600 billion different. And the fact that he just unilaterally pulled out just speaks volumes for their values, Reggie, because here you have the same administration and the same Republican Party that had no problem providing a $2 trillion tax cut, where 83% of the benefit went to the top 1% of taxpayers. They blew a $2 trillion hole in our debt in 2017. They had no problem with that. But now, when we're talking about another $2 trillion to help the American people, to help people who are desperately in need, where their lives and their livelihoods are at stake, Donald Trump, the Republican Party, decided to turn their back on those people. So that speaks volumes for their values, their priorities, and ultimately, it's very sad. Politics, they are what they are, but at the end of the day, we've got to try to help people. We've got to try to help people, particularly during this pandemic. And so I'm personally fine. Our family's fine. We're going to be okay. That won't be true for millions of Americans, including 1 in 4 children right now who are food insecure. It's unconscionable.
And if you have any reflections on last night's debate, I'd love to hear that, because like one of the things that I enjoy like just talking political shop with you. So any reflections on last night's debate, probably more centered around Kamala Harris because she's California's senator. But if you want to offer any reflections.
Well, the clear winner of the debate was the fly that landed on Pence's head. I thought the fly gave a spectacular performance. And you can even get a fly swatter at joebiden.com. But I was incredibly proud of Kamala. I thought she did great. She was walking a tightrope, trying to be respectful, trying to not interrupt the vice president. And I think she was trying to show respect that, frankly, the president lacked the prior week for Joe Biden. And so I think that she effectively made the case as a career prosecutor for why it's so important that we have new leadership. And I thought right from the beginning, when she talked about this administration's failure on COVID-19 being the greatest failure by any administration in the history of the United States, soundbite, done. I think everything after that Mike Pence was saying and that Kamala Harris said on other matters, I think ultimately this election will be a referendum on the president and the vice president and their team, and they're politicizing the virus. They're not handling it appropriately, with 210,000 Americans tragically having lost their lives as a result. The other thing that I thought was amazing is how Vice President Pence didn't really answer many of the questions that were asked. He went on about things that had very little to do with the questions. I remember he was asked about choice, and he answered about Soleimani. Somehow he pivoted, if I remember correctly. And he was asked about pre-existing conditions, and he pivoted to other topics altogether, and then turned around and asked Kamala a question about something unrelated. So I wish that the moderator would have done a little bit better job at holding Vice President Pence to account, to answer the questions that were asked, rather than to go off on the talking points that he wanted to convey. But I think at least it was a more conventional debate. They weren't yelling and screaming at each other. Thank goodness for that. And we'll see what happens as far as next week and whether President Trump is going to run from that debate because he won't do a virtual debate. Virtual debates, I did one last night.
Yeah.
So I actually had to watch the vice presidential debate on tape because I was doing a debate with our Republican challenger here in the 49th just at the same time. But my understanding, we did a virtual debate last night over Zoom. I think it's perfectly acceptable in this day and age. And I guess in 1960, JFK and Richard Nixon did a virtual debate. And if they could do it in 1960, I think they could do it now, Reggie. So we'll see. We'll see what happens next week. But, the presidential debate from a couple of weeks ago really will go down as one of the low points in American political history. That a president of the United States would act like that so disrespectfully and not even try to, on a good faith basis to answer the questions, but just try to interrupt and demean the opponent. I never thought we'd see anything like that from a American president, but there's a lot of things that Donald Trump has done that I don't think I ever would have seen from an American president.
Right, and so we have some activity from the chat, Mike. I want to put into your purview. So what did you think about the framing of the Green New Deal question last night, as opposed to whether Senator Harris supported it and what is their climate change plan?
Well, here's the thing. I have never seen so much misinformation, I don't think, about any bill, resolution, policy as the Green New Deal. And I think it's important to understand that the Green New Deal is a framework. It is a framework. It is a statement of values and priorities rather than specific policy proposals. It's a resolution as opposed to legislation. And the gaps need to be filled in. And you need, if I might, the Green New details. And so that's what we tried to do in our select committee. So I sit on the select committee on the climate crisis. That's what we tried to do, is fill in the details. And so we have 500 pages there of legislation across every area that relates to climate change, how we move goods and people, how we build buildings, how we grow food, how we generate electricity, what we need to do actually in commensurate with the science to reduce our emissions enough where we're actually going to be able to prevent the worst of the climate crisis from occurring. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have a bold and aggressive plan. It's better than any plan that's ever been put forward by any nominee of our party. And if they were to enact their plan, I think it would go a long way towards combating the climate crisis. Zero net carbon by 2050, zero net carbon in the power sector by 2040, et cetera, et cetera. And, at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation being propagated by this administration and by my colleagues across the aisle. Not all of them, but by a lot of them, because they are beholden to the fossil fuel industry and to the fossil fuel industry's talking points. And they're going to do everything they possibly can to try to dissuade people from taking the obvious steps that we need in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and really to restore our global leadership around the world. I think it's important that we also consider the actions that we take, Reggie, in terms of climate change, in terms of followership. I have a friend who's a professor at UC San Diego, David Victor, who talks a lot about this. We have 14% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, the United States. China has 28%. Russia and India has 7%, Russia has 4%. But ours is the only industrialized nation, I believe, that has the political ability to pull the rest of the world in a direction. And President Barack Obama did that with the Paris Climate Accord. And this administration, the Trump administration, decided to turn its back on that effort. And why is that? To line the pockets of the big polluters. And you wonder, why is it that Congress can't do anything about climate and these issues, anything big and anything bipartisan? Follow the money. Follow the money. A lot of it has to do with our broken campaign finance system and the fact that since the Citizens United decision, the fossil fuel industry has donated hundreds of millions of dollars to federal elections. And they could have, and others have said this, they could have invested in research and development. Instead, they invested in politicians. And so part of dealing with the climate issue is dealing with the campaign finance issue. So we're going to move forward as best we can. I'm proud of Senator Harris. I'm proud of Joe Biden and the work that they want to do. I'm excited. Knock wood, in 27 days, we'll win in our district. Democrats will control the House, the Senate, and the White House, and then we'll get to work to actually combat the climate crisis.
Yeah, I love the optimism. I love the way that you talked about, and the chat is saying they love green new details. So like that's a hit.
Well, we need them. We need them. You got to have all the steps. And here's the thing about Congress, Reggie. A lot of committees are involved in climate change because it's such a comprehensive issue. If you look at our plan, and you could go to climatecrisis.house.gov to see that plan, you will see that it involves the Energy and Commerce Committee. It involves the Ways and Means Committee because a lot of it has to do with tax credits and things like that. It involves the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee because you have to build a lot of great new projects. It involves the Agriculture Committee. It involves the Natural Resources Committee. It involves the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. My point is there are more committees involved than not involved. And what that means is it's like you gotta herd cats. You gotta get everybody together, get those best and brightest ideas to break through, and then come to some sort of compromise on an overall package. But we need leadership from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And the key difference on this is that when Donald Trump thinks of climate change, the word that comes to mind is hoax. And when Joe Biden thinks of climate change, the word that comes to mind is jobs. Failing to take action on this is not only catastrophic for our planet, it is also a massive missed economic opportunity. And my Republican friends like to talk a lot, and Mike Pence did this last night. He said their $2 trillion plan. So they associate a cost with that plan. It is unfair to associate that cost unless you also consider the opportunity cost, the cost of inaction in this case. And I have a good friend from Stanford, Marshall Burke, who's an economist there, and he works a lot on climate policy there. And he has estimated that if we do nothing, in other words, we allow the fossil fuel interests, the fossil fuel economy to continue unabated, that it will cost us between 25 and 35 trillion dollars in the coming decades because of the health costs and because of the economic devastation that will ensue. So if you really care about the long-term economic growth, let's create those clean energy jobs and let's solve this crisis. That'll help our economy in the long run, far more than allowing the status quo.
Absolutely. And let's backtrack a bit. So tell us a little bit, for those people who don't know you like I do, tell us a little bit about California 49 and what you love most about representing your district.
Well, it is a beautiful district. I hope everybody, when this pandemic ends, gets a chance to come on out to the California coast. If you haven't been, I think it's one of the most beautiful places in the world. My district goes all the way from Dana Point Harbor, all the way down to UC San Diego and Del Mar. So I've got all that beautiful Southern California coastline, 52 miles. And what I see every time that I speak with our local officials, every time that we evaluate the science, we've got the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, one of the best research groups when it comes to studying our oceans in the world. We are seeing unprecedented coastal erosion, along with we know about the wildfires, the droughts, but coastal erosion is a huge issue. So that's something that I'm very focused on. And the other thing I think that makes our district unique is we've got one of the two major amphibious marine training bases in Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. So we've got our Marines, our sailors, who are keeping us safe and free around the world. And they're the first to fight in international conflicts. And it's an honor to get to know so many of them and their families as well. But it's a great community, Reggie. Right now it's 71 degrees and sunny. It was a little bit hot and a little bit smoky. I think everybody knows that. And look, we still have a lot of California that's on fire right now. And we know there's actually a great report on 60 Minutes this past week that I'd recommend, where they talk about the California wildfires, and they ask one of the most well-respected scientists on climate, and say, just how much consensus is there on climate science? And his answer was about the same amount there is on gravity. So, it is absolutely overwhelming consensus at this time that the climate is changing, that humans are contributing to that change, and that we've got to take aggressive measures to reverse the damage that's being done.
I appreciate that, Mike. And so, one of the things I admire most about you is that you have so much integrity, right? You take tough positions rooted in conscience, even though it may have some political blowback, and with all due respect to some of my progressive friends in more liberal leaning districts, for some of you, it's easier to be more vocal and take progressive positions than Mike made. So, Mike, you invited me to speak on racial justice on one of your programs, and I was honored to do so, but that's not necessarily something that you had to do. So I just want to highlight for folks, like, Mike is a real one. You know what I mean? Like, Mike goes out of his way to stand on principle, even when he doesn't necessarily have to. Right. So I want to honor that. Your district isn't necessarily made to support quote unquote progressive policies, but the way that you articulate them in the best interest of everyone. And I just want to pull that out. And I also want to say, your big idea that you want to talk with us about was climate change. And we talked a little bit about it anecdotally, but I want us to be more specific. So what are some of the things based on your work that you've done in the climate select committee, but also just in terms of your vision based on your 2 decades of work in this, what do we need to do? How do we build consensus, and where do we go from here?
Well, a lot to unpack, but at the end of the day, what we have to do with regard to climate is we have to see where the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, are coming from and figure out how we reduce those emissions commensurate with what the science says we have to do. And we know that transportation, as an example, makes up a huge percentage, roughly 28 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, in California, the greenhouse gas emissions from transportation has been increasing. So what our governor decided to do is, first, we had one of the first standards for vehicle emissions that exceeded the Federal Clean Air Act standards. Smog has been a huge problem in Southern California going back decades. And so way back when, we decided to regulate smog to protect our communities. And that actually happened a couple of years before the Federal Clean Air Act. So we got a waiver from the Federal Clean Air Act in order to regulate tailpipe emissions. And what we've done subsequent to that is we have roughly half of the electric vehicles in the United States, including 2 in my garage right now, in California. And so in order to continue on that path, we put very aggressive goals in place, where Governor Newsom has an executive order saying that by 2035, all new car sales should be zero emission. And what we've done at the federal level, and by the way, you can keep your existing car or your classic car, doesn't mean we're going to come and take your car away. What it does mean is that we need to advance more sustainable transportation options. So at the federal level, I worked with Jeff Merkley, senator from Oregon, and we introduced something called the Zero Emission Vehicles Act, ZEV Act. And it basically says that by 2035, we've got to get the federal government on board as well for new zero emission vehicles. And the reality is that, Tesla has been a huge success story, but we're going to need every major auto manufacturer to emphasize electric vehicles. We're then going to need to build out the renewable grid of the future with utility scale storage to handle all this vehicle electrification. I know that we can do it. That's the other false narrative coming from the fossil fuel industry, is that we're not going to be able to support zero emission transportation because of the flaws in our electricity grid. It is extremely true that we're going to have to improve the resiliency of the grid, the security of the grid, but we can do it. We can do it. And so what we have to do simultaneously over the next 15 to 20 years is increase the number of zero emission vehicles and decrease the overall greenhouse gas emissions of the grid by putting online, just in California alone, we're going to need between 12 and 25 gigawatts of new battery storage, utility scale battery storage that can store that electricity from all the new solar and wind and all the other renewables that we're putting online. So those are just 2 things. Third, we're going to need to have sustainable agriculture, regenerative agriculture. There is a great new movie on Netflix that I recommend called Kiss the Ground. It features, among others, California 49 resident Jason Mraz, great musician, and it's got his music throughout. It also shows his organic farm here in our district. It talks about how if we improve the quality of the soil and we're thoughtful about how we grow food, how we really can help turn things around. And unfortunately, what we're seeing from this administration instead is complete dereliction of trying to protect our public lands. We're trying to sell it off to the highest bidder. So we got to do everything we can on all of the above. You know, sometimes I'm asked, which of these things is more important? They're all important. We have to do all of them. We have to do all of them quickly. And we have to have a comprehensive strategy that's up to the science. So again, climatecrisis.house.gov. It includes, I think, 7 of my bills, but all in all, there's probably, I don't know, a couple hundred bills in there across every sector, every industry, how we're going to clean things up, how we're going to have a brighter, cleaner future. And oh, by the way, it'll also have massive public health benefits on top of everything else, which will be a huge savings for the American people.
And I love the way that you talked about the intersectionality of this, because, you know, similar to what we talked about earlier when Vice President Pence was just like, Green New Deal is terrible. Like, he didn't talk about there are no details there. You're just throwing a blanket statement on a complex issue. That's not helping anyone. That's not helping anyone. And especially considering that we have to do something, like the details matter, and like we have to move forward. We just can't pretend like it's not happening.
Well, the fossil fuel industry dominates the administration. And we've had, you know, past administrations like the Bush administration, the Reagan administration. No question that they had a lot of people that were friendly to the fossil fuel industry. The difference is now we actually have the lobbyists themselves from the fossil fuel industry running the agencies that are supposed to protect us. Right. So David Bernhardt at the Department of Interior, fossil fuel lobbyist. Andrew Wheeler at the EPA, fossil fuel lobbyist before Scott Pruitt was a governor in the pocket. The fossil fuel industry had him in his pocket. Our Bureau of Land Management, Penley, that was running the Bureau of Land Management, absolutely ridiculously bad in terms of his record on the environment. And that's the person managing our public lands. But at the end of the day, we have a chance to turn things around. And that's what we'll do if we elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 27 days. But we also are going to need to enact, as I said before, significant campaign finance reform. I am proud to be one of around 60 members of Congress that haven't taken any corporate PAC money. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because if you take a look, for example, even my opponent, my Republican opponent, he's taken money from oil executives and all the rest, or if people are actually taking money from the oil companies, the coal companies, how do you expect to do anything that will actually move the needle in a positive direction to try to clean those industries up? And I think at the end of the day, it's all about a just transition for the employees of those companies, knowing full well it's not going to all happen overnight. There are certain parts of the country that will fundamentally take longer because of how embedded the fossil fuel industry is in their communities. California, believe it or not, is one of the top oil and gas producing states in the country. So it's taken great political courage for many of our leaders here to stand up to the oil and gas interests and say, we need to move away from this. This is the wrong strategy for our health, for our planet, for our economy in the long term. So it's going to take a lot of political courage. And I think that a rethinking of our campaign finance system would help.
And, you know, the 116th Congress has been historic in many ways. And it's been like one of the best parts of my job is I came in with the freshman class, right? So I got to work with a lot of you in these interesting times. What has been one of your favorite moments while being a part of this Congress?
Oh my goodness, what a wild ride it's been.
Right.
I mean, if you look back at the last 2 years, it's been an extraordinary time, difficult time. starting with the longest government shutdown in our nation's history.
Yeah.
And then, of course, this awful pandemic that has now killed 210,000 Americans. Unthinkable. But I've had a number of really great moments. And perhaps the one that will always stand out for me is when my son and daughter were able to be up on the dais with Speaker Pelosi as she swore us all in. And she was surrounded by all of the children from all the members. And having my kids up there is something that I will never forget. They probably already forgot, but but I have pictures, and I will never forget it as long as I live. And then I think over the last couple of years, getting to actually see how our office has impacted people's lives, helping them with their benefits, helping them with, in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars in federal funds that they were due, but had been given the runaround, being able to really help improve people's lives in a meaningful way. We even helped one gentleman get a lung, if you can believe it. Okay. So I was Fred Rohrbaugh. I was flying on an airplane from San Diego to Washington, and I read the San Diego Union Tribune had a front page story on this gentleman who was getting the runaround about his lung transplant. And he was an employee up in Northern California for a federal agency, and he couldn't get that lung transplant, and he was really in need. And we were able to start making some calls. I personally got on the phone, and the next thing I knew, it's a blessing to get to do things like that. And I'm just so grateful to be in the opportunity to try to serve others. And particularly when it's our veterans who served and sacrificed. My grandfather was a World War II veteran. He was an amazing man. And, I think a lot about his life and kind of how he would see things right now. I think he'd be proud that his youngest grandson is out there trying to help veterans, for one. But I think he'd be proud that I'm trying to stand up for equal rights and civil rights. He was a proud Jewish American, and he served in World War II, came back from the war, was not able to use our family name in his business because of anti-Semitism in Southern California in the 1950s. So he went by Dean for business, Ted Dean, after James Dean, the actor, even though he looked nothing like James Dean at all. And I remember when the Iraq War hit, and when people were protesting, because my grandfather died in 2005. But I remember speaking to him about the Iraq War. And I asked him, what do you think about these peaceful protests? And back then, Move On was just getting started around that movement. And he said, I fought for their right to protest. And that stuck with me, because when I see today Black Lives Matter, when I see today the peaceful protests that are occurring in this country, I know where my grandpa would stand. He would stand with them. He would say, Black Lives Matter. He would want me to stand up for racial justice. So it's actually, well, it might be politically inconvenient at times. I would argue that it is far worse to be inauthentic and not true to yourself and not true to your values. You pay a far greater political consequence for that than to be authentically who you are. And I was raised by a lot of wonderful people that had a lot of impact on me. My grandpa's right at the top of the list. I miss him a lot.
I appreciate that anecdote. And as someone who was very greatly influenced by my grandfather, I totally appreciate that.
This is his flag, by the way. That flag right there.
I was going to ask you that right on.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, thanks for that. And so 2 more questions. One, do you support, this is from the chat, do you support statehood for Puerto Rico and DC?
So for DC, yes, we voted on it in the Congress, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago. And I do, and all you had to do is look at the way that the Trump administration interfered in the peaceful protests at Lafayette Square and understand why that's so important. DC is Puerto Rico is more complex. You have 3.2 million Americans there. and they have the right to self-determination based on the history. So I've been to Puerto Rico. I've spoken with people there on both sides of this, who, and they were so devastated by Hurricanes Maria and Hurricane Irma.
Yeah.
They have a plebiscite right now, so a non-binding vote to get a sense of whether people would support statehood or not. And the last I saw, it's around 65% that support it. So my belief would be that we ought to support what Puerto Ricans want. And if they want statehood, then we ought to admit them and Washington, D.C. And, there's precedent for that with Hawaii and Alaska. But I think the fact of the matter is you've got the people in Washington, D.C. and the people in Puerto Rico that have no representation in the Senate, and their members in the House don't get a vote on the floor. And that's simply wrong.
Didn't you had a resolution about that?
Well, if you see in D.C., they have representation without, or taxation without representation. And, I think at the end of the day, the clear values that we have is that we need to treat everybody with dignity and equality. And that includes the great people in Puerto Rico. Again, 3.2 million Americans in Puerto Rico, and everybody in DC.
Mike, I want to thank you for the answer. And, where can people find out more about your campaign? Because you are up for re-election, you are in Congress. So how can people support you and find out more about your campaign? Let's end with how we can support you.
Thank you, Reggie. Well, you could go to mikelevin.org, mikelevin.org, or you can go to our Twitter at Mike Levin. You go to our Facebook, I think it's at Mike Levin also, and our Instagram. And we'd obviously be very grateful to have your help. We ran in this district, which had been represented by Darrell Issa, Republican, for 18 years. And we had a great victory in 2018. And now we are facing a full-blown Trump supporter who we debated yesterday. We're debating him tomorrow. He's a self-funder. And he's pitched in our district. He's probably put in about 1.2 million of his own money and may put in more. So we need to be financially competitive. And I'm very grateful because we grew our campaign and continue to run our campaign on the basis of grassroots support, including from many, many, many members of Move On all around the nation. And we're truly grateful. So let's do everything we can over these next 27 days, Reggie. We have an opportunity to have a brighter future for our country, to restore the values of democracy. But I'm very concerned that we're going to get complacent. We cannot look at those polls showing Joe Biden up, particularly in the swing states. We've got to act as if he's behind. Let's learn the lesson from 4 years ago when we all thought Hillary Clinton would win. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, Reggie, being at the Jacob Javits Convention Center in New York City on election night 2016, absolutely convinced Hillary Clinton would win, that we were going to break the glass ceiling, and we were literally in a glass building.
Yeah.
And then the unthinkable happened, and we fell short. And I felt something that night that I haven't felt in my life hardly ever, and it was regret. I have regretted almost nothing in my life, but I regretted the fact that I didn't go to Wisconsin or Michigan for Secretary Clinton, that I didn't do just a little bit more. And I told myself that I would never feel regret the morning after an election. In 2018, when we ran, we worked our tail off and we won. I certainly didn't feel any regret then. 2020, we've all got to do our part. It's not enough to vote. We all have to vote, but if you're watching this, if you're watching me and Reggie Hubbard right now, you can do more than vote. You can get out and organize. And it's like the expression, don't agonize, organize. We've got to be motivated. We've got to be active. We've got to leave no stone unturned. And we've got to wake up the morning of November the 4th with no regrets. That's what we've got to do.
Thank you for that. Always good to see you, Mike. Make sure you give my best to your kids if they remember me, and your wife.
I will.
Thank you to Kara and Duncan and Adam and Eric and all the staff who made this happen, because these things just don't miraculously happen. So I always want to shout out the staff. And, Mike, I'm proud to call you a friend, and please know that whatever I can do to help you, or whatever we can do to help you, that I will and we will.
Thank you, Reggie. You're the best, and I look forward to seeing you. And stay healthy, stay safe.
I will. Thank you very much. And so as we end the program, we have a pre-recorded yoga practice on the back end, and that's something that I teach many of my beginner classes. So if you're looking for a little bit more balance in the wrists and the shoulders, that is on tap on the stream. Next week, we have a Power Pack Tuesday that'll feature Sri Preston Kulkarni and Corey Bush, and Rep Debbie Murkis-O'Powell on Wednesday, as we wind down the Big Ideas series. And as we inch closer to Election Day, as Mike said, we can't be complacent. We're so close to creating the future that we're hopeful for, but we can't take it for granted. We have to go make it happen. So let us do what we can do. Let's do all that we can do. No regrets. Thank you for your time and attention today. Episode 11, Politics and Flows, Big Ideas. Over and out.
Elections matter. Justice is on the ballot. Justice is on the ballot when 1 in 5 mothers has hungry children. Justice is on the ballot when millions of people just lost their jobs, many of whom did not have paid sick leave, paid family leave, many of whom don't have affordable childcare. Justice is on the ballot when we look at the disparities around whose children and where they're living geographically have access to broadband to be able to be educated at home, much less have a laptop. Justice is on the ballot when you look at the disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos who have been afflicted with and have died from COVID-19. Justice is on the ballot when people in our country are struggling like they are right now. So we got to get everybody out to vote. We got to take back the Senate. We got to retain our majority in the House. And we need to win the White House and elect Joe Biden.